Welcome to the program. Our goal today is to provide you about 90 to 120 minutes of content in roughly 45 to 50 minutes. So this is going to be a high impact, high speed webinar. Hopefully you enjoy that. With a little bit of an element of some interaction and dynamic elements if you would like. So please feel free to use the webinar chat. If you have any questions, thoughts, things you want me to potentially react to, respond to. We've got a couple people in the producer studio from the Lyft team. We got Vic and Hannah, who will also be manning the chat to help and potentially point things out for me. So again, feel free for that. If time permits, by the way, if you've never attended a webinar that I've led, it's important to know I probably only know about 25% of what I'm going to say when I get started. So I'm never exactly sure how much time is going to be left over at the end. If we do have some time left over at the end, more than happy to open it up to any questions or comments to help improve the take-home value. With that said, let me first thank everybody and share my appreciation. I know how important time is. I know how time pressed we all are. So there's candidly no bigger commitment that someone can give in today's day and age than their time and their attention. So please know that I appreciate that. I'm grateful for that. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that the next 50 or so minutes are as high impact as they can possibly be. I got to say, over the last few years, it's been a very, very interesting operating environment, a very interesting sales environment. Heck, over the last 20, 25 years, I think we've had 3 or 4 once in a lifetime events. So once in a lifetime events seem to be happening with increased frequency. One of my favorite thinkers in business is the late Clayton Christensen, oftentimes referred to as the father of disruption, or the father of disruptive. He's the person that released and kind of coined the whole disruptive theory that has driven much of the last 30 or 40 years in business. And one of the things that he talks about is that in the game of business, or in business, the new game begins before the old game ends. And I think that's where we find ourselves. We're finding ourselves in this super turbulent period where the new rules are still emerging, and we're beginning to see, I think, the real separation from legacy approaches to business and having to leave behind some of the things that worked for many, many years, and really the new playbook emerging, understanding and adopting that. And Lord knows nothing more than the last probably 18 months. You don't need more than the last 18 months to really understand what I'm talking about there. I have been, kind of hate to admit this, but I've been in the sales world now for more than 30 years. And I can honestly say I've been in more difficult economic environments. I've been in more turbulent world environments. But the last 18 months are probably the most confounding environment for leading a sales organization and for managing growth. Part of the reason for that is that on one hand, it really isn't that bad, right? I mean, if we take a look at overall performance for businesses and things like that, I mean, we're not in a recession. None of that has happened. But from a sales execution standpoint, the decision process, customers, buyers looking and changing and hesitating, I've never seen that more acute, and we're seeing that wreak havoc on organizations, and I'm sure you have as well. I'm sure that's part of what has brought you here today. So enough with the introduction. Let's start running through. I'm gonna really kind of look to cover 3 components. We've got Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Act 3 is the big act. Act 1 is going to be short and quick and to the point. So Act 1, I'm going to review some data. I'm going to do that real quickly because I probably don't have to share a whole lot of data to establish the issues and challenges around sales performance. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time to dig into how I think and what our research is showing. How do we get here? Um, I'm a huge believer in looking at focusing on the future. What happened yesterday happened. It's water under the bridge. But as much as the new game is emerging, new rules are emerging. If we don't know how we got to where we are, I don't think we have any chance of really learning the right lessons and applying them, to make sure that the next 3 years meet our expectations. And then we're going to focus the core part of today's program on the four cornerstones. We try to say cornerstones real fast. The four cornerstones to propel sales performance. So this is not a deep tactical webinar. If you're interested in some of the tactics around what we're going to be talking about, we have a number of webinars that we've done in the past that dig into those. We've got a number of other resources. So if this prompts any thoughts in your head and you're going, okay, Doug, that's really interesting, but what do I do about that? Just send me a note. I'd be happy to talk to you one-on-one. I think tactics are very situational. So, what's right for one business is not necessarily going to be right for the other business. So I always get nervous when I go too far into tactics on a broad program like this. So I'd be more than happy to share some thoughts and tips to how to apply these to you. But also, if you'd rather not talk, we have a number of resources that we could share with you. All right, let's take a look at the data. And I got to tell you, if you take a look at the last 12 to 18 months, the data doesn't look so good. Really interesting benchmark report came out about 3 weeks ago from EPSTA and Pavilion, reviewing thousands of sales transactions, billions of dollars of transaction revenue. And what they found was 2023 compared to 2022. And by the way, 2022 was not a banner year. So we're not comparing ourselves to the high watermark. Sales cycles times have increased by 16%. And by the way, they're increasing by 16% at a time, and I'll get to this later, that we're obsessed about efficiency and we're obsessed about shortening sales cycle times. So, side note, I don't think the way sales cycles times are measured is actually the most useful data point, the most useful metric, but the point that sales cycles are getting longer and longer, while the dominant tactics are specifically designed to get them to be shorter and shorter, is a signal that we should be paying attention to. Now, the bigger issue is that deal values are down 21% and win rates are down 18%. So it is taking us longer. And by the way, if you dig into the data detail in the benchmark report, you're going to see that it's also taking more time. So it's not just longer, but it's taking more time, more resources from our sales and marketing organizations to win smaller deals, or I should say to win fewer smaller deals, right? That's probably not what we're talking about when we're sitting in our conference rooms, our board rooms, our Zooms or Teams, and we're planning our go-to-market strategies for the next 12 to 18 months. I don't think we're talking about, hey, let's find ways that we can win less on smaller deals and have them take more time, right? So if that's the case, what we really have to do is we really have to pause and ask the question, how did we get here? How did we get here? And this is where as I've been doing the research for this and I've been putting together the thoughts, in the haze, in the turbulence, I actually found a lot of really good room for optimism, right? So, the closest that I can compare the type of operating environment that we're in today. Oh wow, holy cow! I just realized I didn't turn on my video. You guys, I'm sure, want to get a beautiful view of as I was working and preparing for that, the good news was the closest operating environment I can compare this to would be 2008, 2009, and 2010. The problem with 2008 to 2010 was that was a deep recession, and the operating environment was structural, and a whole lot of things that we could not do anything about, right? They were um, they were issues that built up over decades that led to a whole lot of structural inefficiency. And the reality was we just needed, as businesses, we just needed to let that play out. Here's what I found about where we are right now. The challenges that we're having, that data that I just walked through, most of that is a result of our own making, right? Now some of it was because of the operating environment that we've been in, but it's still not structural. And what I mean by that is we can change it, right? So, I mean, I got good news and bad news for you. Your next 12 to 18 months are in your hands. Your next 18 to 36 months are in your hands, right? We need to make different, better choices. And to be able to do that, we need to understand how we got here. And so here's the first component. And this has been a major, major issue, a major driver of why we find ourselves where we are. Money was literally raining from the sky. I remember when I grew up, my mom, dad would tell me all the time, money doesn't grow on trees. Money doesn't drop from the sky. But that's really what was kind of happening, certainly over the last 3 years, and candidly over the last most of the last 20 years since Y2K, we've seen, with some very, very small exceptions, we've been in a decreasing to zero interest rate environment. We've seen virtually no inflation, right? We started to see inflation emerge over about 18 months ago. 24 months ago is when it started to stick. And we just saw lots and lots and lots of capital flooding the market. I mean, capital was cheap. You could borrow at small single digit percentages, and it just filled the market with more and more and more and more, and companies that really weren't even viable were expanding. They're raising multiple $1 million of valuation. IPO markets were lit on fire. And what's important to understand here is whether or not you're getting early stage funding, whether or not you're going public, whether or not you're borrowing significant money from banks, those issues drive the game that we're playing. What causes money to move in the capital markets kind of sets the stage for what the rules of business, what the impact of business was. There's a lot of conversation that we're moving from the growth at all costs model, right? And the reason that we were growth at all costs was because there was no cost for the growth, relatively speaking, right? So the net result of this was we learned a whole lot of really bad lessons. We thought that we were generating increased sales because of things we were doing, and it really had nothing to do with us. We lost sight of what our core markets, who are our core customers. We increasingly thought that, hey, if you just throw this out there, someone's going to buy it. I'm obviously oversimplifying this a little bit. When I was a financial advisor, I used to keep a sign above my door. It said, "Don't confuse brains with the bull market," right? And that's what happened in a whole lot of areas. And by the way, even if you were not doing that, even if you were disciplined, that's what was coloring the market so much. And so if we look at the buy side, we look at our customer side, part of the problem that we're having today, regardless of your industry, is they've overbought, right? They've overbought. They're having to refigure out their game and how capital moves right now. That's as ambiguous as it's been since I've been a professional. And so that's driving a very low context market. And what that means is we need to bring the context. We need to bring the focus. More on that in a minute. Now, the other thing that we have to understand is that it's the buyer, it's the buy side, it's the customer that defines the market, right? And there's three rules about a customer, right? There's three rules about them, right? The market is always right. The market doesn't know what it needs, and what the market wants is always changing. Now, I always joke around, like, those are three really tough rules, and if you can hear that, like, hey, those are the rules of the game, that sounds like a fun game to play, then then you're built for growth, right? From a mindset standpoint. But that's where we are, right? And what we need to understand is, like, we keep talking about the new buyer, but the new buyer ain't so new, right? We need to understand we are operating in noisier markets than ever before, and buyers are more confused than ever. And and the thing that I've been talking about this for 20 years now. The very first article I published um, under Imagine Now Live was avoid the commoditization trap. And what I talked about in the commoditization trap is we talk about differentiation and value add, and and our customers just call that complexity and noise and confusion. So as we're trying to level up our game, we're just throwing more confusion. We're just confusing our customers more. And for a whole bunch of reasons, one of the main ones being what I just talked about, how money was flowing. Sellers are less present than ever at the critical inflection points in the buying journey, right? We've actually seeded so many thought leaders and so many people had just completely seeded the element of the journey where customers really form their judgments and opinions that lead to the actions that they take. And we as businesses have less and less and less presence and influence at those points. We need to understand there is no longer the decision maker. If we're involved in a complex, high consideration sale, it is consensus driven, right? We need to change our approach to the market. We need to understand this is the market that we're in. And we have to understand, high intent is great. I absolutely want to talk to people that are active in the market, that are looking to buy, but we have become obsessed with high intent. And what I want to get across here is if the idea of high intent, if you're listening to me right now and you're saying, obsessed with high intent, Doug, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think about high intent. Like, that's not a term that I use. What I want to tell you is if whether you realize it or not, you've become obsessed with high intent because that's where the game has gone. So the only way that you're able, like the only way if you're not to know you're not obsessed with high intent, that you're not falling into this trap, is because you consciously have a strategy that balances pre-intent with high intent. Now look, when demand is going through the roof, when the risk of purchases are lower and lower, and we need to understand, and I don't mean to be a broken record, but when in a zero interest rate, zero inflation, high capital flow market, right, the level of risk associated in purchases is dramatically reduced, right? The thing that's happened and why suddenly deals are shrinking, churn rates are higher, retention rates are lower, average deal sizes are lower, is as you begin to move more and more to the area of appealing to the ready to buy customer, you're going to be subject. Whoops, wrong way. You're going to be subject to the headwinds that emerge, to shifts in market. And so what's happened is, because businesses stopped following first principles, they started chasing the money. We failed to build the market, and we failed to continually develop the market so that when this shift occurred, too many businesses have too little presence and too little strength in those areas that influence real buyer decisions. And further, just the nature of technology, the nature of what has happened over the last, how difficult the last 20 years have been in general for businesses. The businesses that exist today, they're all pretty good. By the way, the fascinating news that I'm continuing to see, digital came out, and digital was supposed to be the great equalizer, right? You can outthink your competition instead of outspend them. And what did we find? We found that, well, for a brief period of time, SEO was this great empowerment vehicle. What's happening now? SEO and the whole SEO game and the whole digital demand gen game continues to reward at a higher propensity the largest players. We're beginning to see this about AI. AI was going to be the great equalizer. What's happening? We're seeing AI from both the supply side and the demand side disproportionately rewarding the already largest, biggest players that are involved, right? And the thing to understand is in any market, you're competing with good enough. And the largest competitor or two is the good enough shop, right? Competing with good enough is hard, right? What we need to do as businesses is we need to sharpen our sword, right? We need to sharpen our saw, our sword, whatever metaphor you want to use, to really identify who is our core customer, what do we do better than anybody else, what problems does that connect to, so that we are able to have a distinctly different conversation. Brett Adamson refers to this as enabling our customers to make sense of their world. This is where sales has been changing. This is not new, but we're not where we need to be. This is where sales has been changing over the last 2 to 3 decades. From being a vehicle, a tactic to communicate value, to one that creates it. And what that means is the role of our go-to-market, that's our sales, our marketing, our customer success teams, our service teams, is less and less about being experts in our solutions, experts in our business, and far more about being enablers and facilitators and translators for our customers in their business. Our job from a go-to-market standpoint is to help our core markets, companies, the people in our core market, to understand their world better. And the companies that do that well, the companies that do that exceptionally will be rewarded exceptionally. And the companies that do that well, companies that do that good, we're going to lose more and more share to the largest competitors that do good enough. And the business that we win will continue to be under greater and greater margin pressure. So earlier I talked about how we just seeded this whole element of market. I've now seen the numbers go up to 80%, but I like this slide because it's nice, it's old, it's more than 10 years. For more than 10 years, we've believed this idea that nobody wants to talk to salespeople. We've believed this idea that by the time someone wants to talk to a salesperson, they've already, they're just looking for terms and conditions, if you will. Here's what I want you to know. It is a myth. It is a myth. It is a myth, right? We have taken that, combined it with high intent, and completely evacuated and seeded the area where we could have greatest influence. But when you actually talk to buyers, again, I'm talking especially about buyers involved in complex and or high consideration purchases. When you actually talk to them, what you find out is the vast majority of them do want to talk to salespeople earlier than the consideration phase. They don't want to talk to them about buying. 73% of buyers are willing to meet with salespeople. And I would say from my experience, my research, are eager to meet with salespeople if the salespeople help them define their problems and needs, if they teach them something about their category and their competitors, if they're providing objective information. See, we love to have our salespeople talk about solutions, but we forget a solution is agnostic. A solution is product agnostic. If your salespeople are spending more than about 20, maybe 25% of their time talking about your solution, I've got news for you. They're not creating value. They're telling. So what happens when we're only spending if we're spending more than 25% of our time talking about, ourselves, our products, our services, our expertise, whatever, right? What we're telling our customers is we're not relevant until the very, very end, right? We need to help people understand what's going on in the world to help them frame their decision. And then the fourth area is challenge. How are they doing business, right? You find me that salespeople, and I know many of them, that help change and improve the way organizations and people in their market think. I'll tell you salespeople who don't have enough time to talk to the people that want to talk to. And by the way, this goes beyond just your salespeople, because this gets into your marketing, this gets into your content, this gets into your messaging. Right? 33% will favor a vendor that shows me a new way to solve an established problem. And 66% say that vendors that have taken the approach that I talked about earlier have enabled them to shorten their purchasing decision and sales cycle. Right? So when we're coming in and we're just trying to give what's being asked for, right? We're appeasing the customer. And by the way, why do we do that? Well, the customer's ready to buy. We've got to. Yet here's my question: in this age of efficiency, I mean, the last 10 years, sales organizations have obsessed about efficiency. They've obsessed about sales cycle, but they keep getting longer. Well, here's why. If you think about all of this, what this is saying is that the point of highest influence, if you want to change how people think, if you want someone who's not buying from you to begin to think about buying from you, if you want someone to be able to make the decision and do it in less time, that's the problem identification phase. But the difficulty is sellers are only there 11% of the time. By the way, those are the sellers that are winning. Those are the sellers that are enjoying efficient sales cycles. They're enjoying growth. So what do we have to do to play this game differently? The first cornerstone: stop focusing on efficiency. Selling organizations need to learn the lessons that manufacturers learned in the 1980s. They were so focused on efficiency. The more efficient they got, the more money they lost. What they realized was efficiency actually isn't what matters. Throughput matters, maximizing throughput. And throughput, if your manufacturer, is not products made, but products bought at an underlying cost element, right? I mean, when I was first entering business, the first 10 to 15 years, every day there was some headline about billion-dollar write-downs of inventory. You don't hear that very much. Why? Because manufacturers stopped focusing on efficiency. They started focusing on throughput. Here's my question. Why are sellers having the problems that they're having when our databases are larger than they've ever been before? Opportunity creation is greater than it's ever been before. We need to stop obsessing about speed. We're so focused on faster that we forget speed doesn't actually mean anything. Velocity is what. Are we making progress? Right. We don't get to pay dividends, cash checks on average sales cycle. We get it on revenue per day. How are we managing the throughput of revenue? How are we manufacturing more, better revenue? How are we optimizing our resources to generate more, better revenue? Right. And really more, better gross profit. Right. Generating more revenue at lower margins. It's not really a recipe for scale. Now, to do that, we need to tighten our market definition. See, what the last 10 years did was it demonstrated that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, because we did just the same damn thing we did that caused some of the problem in the 2008 to 2010 cycle, given what happened post the 2000 recession, which was, the fish were jumping out of the lake. So we started calling ourselves anglers, right? We didn't learn how to fish, right? Buyers were buying so much. Hey, be there, be there, be there. Kind of what the game was. Let's go back to first principles. Like this idea that I share, the bowling alley analogy, I didn't create it. It comes from Jeffrey Moore. He talks about it in Crossing the Chasm, right? Uh, a foundational book. It's 40 years old, right? Focus on your head pin market. Who is your core market? That is where the focus needs to be. So what I was saying is in every percentage increase we get in our core market produces 11% more profit, all other things being equal. So every dollar of core market revenue that we generate creates 11% more profit than non-core market revenue, right? So if we're focused on our core markets, we don't have to generate the same revenue to have the same impact. And when we understand our core market, we can dig deeper. We can win at a deeper level than our competition, right? Because without a deep understanding of our market, the only thing we can understand is the sales cycle. And what we're missing is the buying cycle. What we're missing are all the things that lead to companies needing to move forward and potentially to buy and require the products or services that you sell. Right? We need to start looking at our market and segment the market. I remember my first sales job, my manager sat me down and he said, Doug, there's only two things I want you to do. I said, what's that? And he said, I want you to keep the business that we have, because I was assigned a set of accounts. I want you to keep the business that we have and get more. He said, Doug, that's all selling. Just keep what you got and get more. I love it. It's a great point. We need to segment our market in that same way, right? I've audited sales organizations, and what I see is they're spending more time with non-growth customers than they are with growth customers. And what's worse is we're treating non-growth customers the same way we treat growth customers, right? Who are the businesses? Where are the opportunities that we're going to generate growth? How are we allocating the appropriate resources there? And how are we playing? How are we implementing the right game plan? Right? That's not to say that people that are producing a tremendous amount of business with you, but they don't have a lot of growth potential. That's not to say that they're not valuable. They are valuable, right? But they need to be managed. We need to start playing a smarter game. I refer to this as what causes sales. We need to dig in and understand what leads to a sale, what causes a sale to occur. And that's not a proposal, right? We're here, the customer buying is here. There are some key points that if we stop and think about it, we can plot out. And as we understand that, we can implement the methodologies and processes to increase the likelihood of those things happening. And then further, we can align all of the other actions that we're taking to identify what are those core outcomes, how can we drive them. And you see, because we started facing headwinds about 3 years, right? Really 3-4 years ago, the pandemic with all the money supply that came out kind of let us hide that. We missed the underlying element of what causes sales, right? We started looking at, and anybody that uses the term net revenue retention will know what I'm talking about. We started seeing, if you go back and you take a look at growth markets, you'll be able to trace the origins of the problems we're dealing with today to about 5 years ago, right? That's when we began to see customer growth numbers begin to reduce. And so what businesses started doing was they started looking at, okay, well, what's the revenue acquisition, right? And hence the term net revenue retention came in. Now, I'm not saying growing our existing customers is not an important strategy. It is. But what I'm saying is, if we're not generating more engagement with our markets, if the generation of engagement is not at a higher rate than what we're generating customers, and if we're not generating customers at a higher rate than we're generating revenue growth, then what we're doing is we're building a ceiling lower and lower. If we want to scale, if we want more growth at lower costs, we've got to develop a lift effect, right? And that means generating attention and engagement at a higher rate that connects to what causes sales so we can win more customers at a lower cost that can enable us to generate more revenue. So if we want to focus on velocity, if we want to focus on throughput, if we want to begin to focus on what really causes sales, we need to flip how we're going to market. And I've been thinking about saying this for probably the last 5 or 7 years. I really wanted to say this for the last 5 to 7 years. I just felt like, it's not quite there yet, but it's there. If you're involved in high consideration, if you're not defining the problem, you're being commoditized. What leads a company, what leads an organization to spend resources and to change? It's when they understand a problem and have come to the determination that the status quo is no longer viable. Here's my question to you. Why should companies change what they're doing and buy from you? Right? What's the problem that they have? And realize not every company that should be buying from, not every company that fits your profile is in a position to buy from you. They may not have the problem right now. Like I know for our customer profile, I know at any given time, roughly 10% of companies likely have that problem today, likely have something that is big enough to justify a change in course and speed. Right? The worst thing I can do is try to convince them to do otherwise. So if I look at this month, it's roughly 10% of my market. If I look at this year, I'd say probably 30% of the market is going to need to. If I look at it from a 3-year period, it's pretty close to 100%. Right? I don't need to make you buy. I don't need to force you to. What I need to do is teach you how to identify those problems. By the way, the other thing I know is only about a third to half of the companies that have the problem will actually properly identify the problem and address it. See, that's my point of leverage, and that's the vast majority of businesses' point of leverage. You show me a company that experiences rapid growth in a market that's not just super high demand, everybody is. You show me the company that's growing at a higher rate than their comparison set. I'll show you a company that's building that connection, typically years before the need is there. They've established that basis. That's the role of marketing. That's the role of our content efforts. And our sales organization and our marketing teams need to be working in collaboration to make that work. So how do you make somebody aware of that need to change? Well, you got to break their frame. You have to deliver a point of view. Now, here's the thing about a point of view. A point of view can be wrong. More importantly, I can disagree with a point of view. Now, the interesting thing is I've been saying this for 20 plus years. My third article was Make Your Offering a Prescription Drug. And this is back in 2004. When I was saying it, it wasn't all that super common. Right? 2011, the Challenger sale came. All of a sudden, challenging became a common element. The idea of a teaching point of view became common nomenclature. Right? So what I'm talking about now is not new at all. Matter of fact, increasingly, there's broad agreement on this concept. But it's not happening. Right? What I'm seeing is more and more go-to-market messages and more value propositions that are just vague and weak or not real. Sorry, trying to think of a better word. It's not overly derogatory. Just they don't mean anything. It's just more noise. Right? We've got to deliver a strong point of view. And that means we got to ask ourselves a really tough question. Are we indispensable? We need to rethink about our value propositions and our go-to-market messages. Because for at least the next 3 to 5 years. And by the way, here's the good news. If you take this approach and you're in a market like we were in the last 5 years, which was the free money market, this still works. But what works in the free money market doesn't work in a difficult market. Here's what you need to be thinking of. You need to, I'm not saying stop 100%. No more than a third of your time should be focused on all the benefits that come from buying. Like those are table stakes. Here's what you need to do if you want to generate more strong conversations that's going to reverse the trend of what we're seeing from sales performance. You've got to identify what's the cost of not buying from you. See, the cost of staying the same has to be clearly the case. It has to be very clear that the cost of staying the same is greater than the cost of change. And that's why we're seeing, Matt Dixon in his book, Jolt, talks about, 40 to 60% of transactions are ending in no decision. And it's not status quo bias. It's just pure indecision because it's not clear what is the cost of staying the same. Like they identify that, yeah, they do want to do that. Yeah, there are problems, but they're unclear of like, what is the cost of change? What does that mean? And so if you want to implement this type of approach, what you've got to do is you've got to focus in on what are the critical issues that you address, formulate your point of view, and bring that to the market. Provoke the discussion. Don't provoke your customer. Provoke the discussion. To do that, you got to stop thinking about closing business all the time. We've got to stop thinking about efficiency. We've got to stop thinking about why buy from us. And what we need to do is we need to focus on activation. Right? I've seen a reversion to what I saw in the late 1990s and early aughts, which is we have our active pipeline and then a bunch of people in a various state, right? We're not developing our market. We need to get out there. We need to be developing the market, developing the point of view, developing relationships, developing the understanding. Right? We need to build a strong progression of how do people come to understand their business better and what we offer them. Right? We need to work in a far more collaborative approach. Right? Outreach often means outbound. Like we've got to be bringing something like it's called go-to market. Right? What is the point of view that we're bringing to the market? Outreach is all about getting to the point of the commitment from somebody, intent to investigate. We try to skip that. Hi, you want to buy a watch? That's back to where we are. We are back to being solutions looking for problems. What you'll find is if you put a strong outreach, and by the way, you can be outbound and not fall this category of outreach because if all you're focused on is the existing demand, it's sales. And if we haven't built a strong foundation in the first part of the process, we are not going to have success in the second part of the process. And all you have to do is look at the trends over the last 5 years to understand what I'm talking about. We're so focused on the endpoints of the journey that the reason that we're struggling is we're not aligning with the early parts of the journey. You see, for us, this is what causes sales for us. When someone decides to assess their current situation, which could then lead them to decide, hey, you know what, I could use some help, right? Our goal in our development process is to be relevant and engage and influence and teach here. Because if we can teach here, we can stimulate this happening faster and how they look at it. But that means we got to stop measuring the wrong things and start measuring the right things. And here's the last cornerstone. If you want to multiply your efforts, you have got to bring a learning and development function, a strong, consistent learning and development function into your organization. I've got some news that's going to surprise some people when it comes to sales performance. It ain't a funnel and it ain't a fly. They're great constructs. They work from a strategic standpoint. I'm a huge fan of the flywheel theory, right? But that's not how sales. Sales is dynamic, complex manufacturing process, right? And if we're going to do that, we've got to go beyond just processes and methodologies. We've got to have frameworks, right? This is why we use the deals framework. You don't have to use the deals framework, but if there's no framework for your organization, if you're not operating from a framework, there is no learning. And if there is no learning, there is no optimization. There is no scale. There's just throw more, right? You can't optimize if you don't have a connection. We can't just optimize for lead generation and close business. We have to be able to break the intermediate steps in and understand what those intermediate steps are. So what is the framework or frameworks that your go-to-market team is using to keep everybody on the same page so that you can analyze and assess? You show me somebody who's a top performer in anything, I'll show you somebody who uses a framework. And that's how they judge themselves and others judge them so that they can improve. We need to accept the fact that learning and development is not about managing and it's not about training. Now, training is an element of learning and development. But just because you do some training does not mean you have a learning and development function, and learning and development is not managed. Don't make no mistake about it. Unless we're talking about companies that have more than 20,000 employees, managers are critical elements of your learning and development program. That should not be just dependent on them alone. But you show me who your manager is, I'll show you what the learning and development impact is. We need to start thinking about L&D through the process of a cycle. What's our framework? That's going to guide our approach, our MO. That framework needs to drive the technology to enable. Right? I see so much technology implemented in ways that conflict the underlying strategy of a company. It baffles me. One of the reasons for that is there's no clear framework, there's no clear go-to-market strategy in place to drive that. Then we've got training and coaching. By the way, here's kind of the way I look at a good cycle. You should be training once a quarter, coaching every week to every 2 weeks, formally. I mean, like you're always coaching on an ongoing basis. Like coaching is an all the time thing, but kind of a formal coaching on a weekly to bi-weekly basis, depending upon what's going on. So training kind of gets you the chunks. Training is a great way to introduce, and it's a great way to capstone. But if you want to change performance, that's all about coaching. And that needs to connect to measurements that align with the frameworks that just kind of keep that going in a virtuous cycle. Now, I call it the great multiplier because if you've got a strong learning and development function in there, you're going to see that learning and development is going to have a 10 to 25% economic impact. And what that means is that it could be revenue, it could be better margins, it could be longer lifetime. Like there's a whole bunch of ways that it connects to generate higher profitability and higher growth. So a 25% economic impact means learning and development produces the economic impact of 5 salespeople for 4 salespeople. Now, on the cost side, it's going to have a 30 to 50% retention improvement, which, by the way, has a kind of reinforcing effect on economic impact. Kind of stretch that. And it'll have an impact on your efficiency of 5 to 15%. Right? If you're bringing that learning and development in, which is building and bringing the whole idea of optimization into real life, you're going to get a multiplier that you wouldn't, like you probably sitting here today don't believe is possible. And so sometimes people have said to me, well, Doug, I can't really do this because I got to make a choice. Am I going to hire these 2 people or am I going to implement a learning and development program? I'm like, oh yeah, I understand. That's it. Really, that's actually an easy question to answer. you implement the learning and development program. Because while hiring the individual headcount is important, but you get one person for one person, right? What other investment gives you this type of leverage, gives you this type of impact across everybody involved in the process? Now, earlier I talked about the fact that we need to get out of this speed idea and into a velocity idea. And I'm going to finish the conversation today with the idea that it's time to move beyond marketing, sales and marketing. And what we need to do is we need to put together our go-to-market velocity team. And I'm sorry, I hate to tell you this, but go-to-market is a team sport. If senior leadership is not involved in the strategy, I don't care what you're doing, it's not going to work. It's not going to have the impact. What's the business case being made to senior leadership? What's their involvement in role? We need to be thinking about new sales and expand through different lenses. That doesn't mean they have to be technically different sales teams, but there should be a group that's looking at new sales from a new sales perspective and expand from an expand perspective. Our marketing teams and our RevOps team. Those 5 functional areas, that's the go-to-market velocity team. And the better that those groups are working together, and that, by the way, that doesn't, I want to say alignment, but alignment kind of triggers the wrong thought. Because let me tell you, if you bring those 5 teams together and they're aligned, it's not going to feel like alignment because there's going to be tension because all 5 of those groups think about different things. They have different priorities. And it's the orchestration of that drives magic. That's the show, everybody. If you're interested in how we can help, just want to let you know, we've got a quick program called the Revenue Acceleration Jumpstart. Can increase the impact and ROI of your sales and marketing efforts by 15 to 35%. Thank you, everybody. And if we can help, don't hesitate to reach out.